On this episode of China Uncensored, if the South China Sea is dominated by China, then the Indian Ocean should be dominated by China, obviously. Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. Well, folks, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that India and China probably aren't entering a Cold War-era nuclear submarine race. The bad news is it could actually be worse. And it turns out the US might be right in the middle of it. China and India are the two most populous countries on Earth. They're also economic rivals, share the world's longest contested land border, and are importing more weapons than any other countries out there. What could go wrong? You see, just because the South China Sea clearly belongs to China, doesn't mean the Indian Ocean belongs to India. A senior captain from China's National Defense University made that clear. Now, that wasn't some kind of threat, obviously. But just for the sake of argument, if you were wondering how many submarines China would need to blockade India, the answer is 10. Not like they've thought about it before, but it would be 10. And the 18 naval bases the Chinese regime is building along key trade choke points surrounding the Indian Ocean would have no part to play in such a purely hypothetical blockade. Oh, and that nuclear submarine that was patrolling around the Gulf of Aden last year? Don't worry. That was just to hunt pirates, because submarines are the best choice for that. You also shouldn't worry about the two Chinese submarines that docked in Pakistan last year. You know, Pakistan, India's nuclear-armed rival. The Chinese were probably just showing off the goods to help secure that 8-sub construction deal they finalized toward the end of last year. And yet, for some reason, India seems nervous about the frequent visits Chinese submarines are making to the Indian Ocean, as if China's rapid buildup of artificial islands was just an effort to break out of the South China Sea and then project into the Indian Ocean. You know, as one of the opening moves in China's quest for global military and economic dominance. Ridiculous. But just in case, India and the US started off the month with talks about anti-submarine warfare. For decades, India has maintained its distance from the US. But China's recent submarine activities have changed that. India and the US have conducted joint military exercises before, but now they're stepping it up. Last month, U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter and his Indian counterpart issued a joint statement saying they would strengthen military ties. Part of that meant India would finally allow the U.S. military access to Indian military bases. The U.S., for its part, has agreed to give India access to weapons technology like the P-8, its most advanced submarine hunter. Apparently it can track a sub from the sky. This is all to help India narrow its military gap with China. And believe me, the gap is pretty darn big. China has the biggest navy in Asia, with 300 vessels, 62 of them are submarines, 4 of which can fire nuclear ballistic missiles, according to a report by the Pentagon last year. India has less than half as many ships, including only 1 nuclear sub, which is on lease from Russia. And both countries have a lot at stake. China and India get more than 40% of their GDP from international trade. So it makes sense that they would both want to secure the tremendously profitable ocean trade routes. But the US is the world leader in anti-submarine warfare. It got a lot of experience from going through a very similar situation with the Soviet Union during the Cold War, though with one very key difference. According to this report by the Lowy Institute, the threat of nuclear annihilation kept tensions between the US and the Soviets from escalating. But as for India and China, their submarines are both too few in number and not technologically advanced enough to be an effective nuclear deterrent. In other words, back in the day, both the US and the Soviets knew that if they launched a nuclear attack first, they wouldn't be able to stop the other side from launching one of theirs. But with China and India, each might feel that they could launch a nuke and still successfully stop the other side from detonating one of their own. This might then be a problem that both India and China want to pump up their sub presence. Then when you add to that, Pakistan and North Korea are both trying to get nuclear subs on top of US presence in the region, well, it's getting a little crowded over there. But not to be outdone with that whole being able to blockade you thing, later this year, India, the US, and Japan will be holding joint military drills near the Philippines. That'll be sure to ease tensions. But you know what kind of sub the Chinese Communist Party fears the most? Subs to China Uncensored. So subscribe today. What do you think about the tensions in the Indian Ocean? Leave your comments below. Thanks for watching. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.